Thank you so much, Lindsey. I think you touched on one of the reasons that I'm so interested in this issue when you talked about unrest and the audience's emotions coming out, because I think film has such a power to put a human face to an issue, and you both have done that so beautifully in all of your work. We will now move to Dawn. Dawn Porter and her son Will, who's here somewhere in the audience, came all the way to be with us from San Francisco. So we're really excited to have them. Dawn is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has appeared on HBO, PBS, Discovery, and Netflix, among others. A two-time Sundance Festival director, her film Trapped, which we'll see a clip of today, explores laws regulating abortion clinics in the American South, and it won a special jury social impact prize at the 2016 Sundance Film Festival, as well as an acclaimed Peabody Award. So we are honored to have Dawn with us today.
Thank you all for coming. It's so exciting to be here. I was last here in Oxford with the Skoll Forum and Stories of Change. And there we were doing what they called kind of a social impact. We were working with the social entrepreneurs, and they married filmmakers with people who do good work. And so that was really, really fun. So I've been trying to get back here. So Vaughn, I keep thinking Lindsey Vaughn. Like, I don't know if you are skiers, but so it's a little jet lag. But Vaughn, when she said, would you like to come to Oxford? I probably said yes too quickly. And she probably thought that was a little strange. So can the MBA students raise your hands again? Good. Yeah, you are. And what are the rest of you? Are you movie people? Are you students? Who are you?
Staff of the business school.
Staff of the business school. People, real people. Good, love that. Anyone else not real? No? We'd like to call you audience. Yeah.
Culture studies scholar.
Culture studies. Ah, interesting. Okay. Yeah. Lawyer. Yay. Oh. Okay. She wins so far. Yeah.
I'm an MSc student doing environmental change.
Nice. Yeah.
And I'm a consultant in humanitarian and development sectors.
Great. Yeah.
I'm working medical administration with films for the NHS.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great. Anybody else I missed? Yeah.
Head teacher.
Head teacher. Oh, okay, she wins now. Who else did? Anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, PhD in media and culture studies, working on films.
Great.
I work on women's economic empowerment programs at Oxford.
Hey. You all win.
I do planning policy, urban planning policy.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. So really great and diverse audience, and I hope you will continue to talk to each other and with each other. One of the things we find as filmmakers, I was really impressed with Lindsey's presentation. We, as filmmakers, sometimes you go into film for different reasons. Sometimes you really just want to make art. And sometimes you are really compelled by an issue. And sometimes you want to do both. And it's not always easy to do both. So if you, there's kind of a raging, I would say before the Trump administration, and I do think that this was a factor, I think that there was a raging kind of debate and discussion about whether films should be art or they should be, information, as if they couldn't coexist. And I think now we are realizing the numbers are proving they can absolutely coexist, but not only do they coexist, but they're actually really urgent. Media is a really accessible tool. There's a low barrier to entry for many people, and so we are finding more and more stories are finding their distribution. So my personal story is I was a lawyer. I still am. I still pay my bar dues because having fought for that law degree, I just can't not pay that. I'm always late too, which is so stupid because I don't want to pay the dues, but I don't want to not be a lawyer. So I am still a lawyer and passed the bar and registered in the District of Columbia. And so I worked for a news organization. I worked for ABC News in New York, and then I worked for A&E Television. And through that work, I saw how impactful stories are. But I also started to see that it was at the time that I was there, reality television was just starting to become really, really popular and getting these incredible audiences. But then this thing happened where reality wasn't so real anymore, because what the networks found is it's very hard to do real, interesting storytelling in 13 weeks, which is the network cycle. So there was a little bit of fudging, a little bit of coaching, and then some outright scripting. But the audiences had developed a taste for real work. And so I think that helped to gain audiences for documentary, because we were still doing real storytelling. So, as Lindsey said, our projects most of my projects take like upwards of 3 years to do. We are following people, we are raising money, we are doing, all kinds of work. It's hard to gain the intimacy that you saw in a project like Jen's in 13 weeks. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. And what we're not is news 8-minute pieces. We're not quick stories, which is why it's so exciting to see the trans series, because that kind of storytelling, it's a short form, but it's not a news short form meant to impart information and statistics. What it's grabbing you is your heart, and having you say, I recognize that person, I recognize those feelings. I see with my own eyes that person is a girl. And so why are we having it's such a different experience to read about a biologically male born child who thinks that they are a she, than to see a person who clearly looks like a girl. And you can understand that of course that person is a girl, and why would that person be in a bathroom of the person of the other gender? That seems insane when you see her. And that's what stories can do. So the first movie I made was a film called Gideon's Army. It was about public defenders working in the Deep South. And I got a grant from the Ford Foundation to do that film. And that's when I left my job, my direct deposit job, which I don't know if you guys know what that means, but it's good. It means you get paid every 2 weeks and you have health care. And on top of it, I was the standards and practices person, which meant I was the ethics person. Or as my husband used to say, you watch television for a living and they pay you to do that. And so I quit that job in order to make really lucrative documentary films. So I will show you. Let's see what's happening. So this was my first film. I hadn't made a film, and I was a lawyer, and I was really interested in these public defenders, so lawyers who represent people accused of crimes, and they do it, the state pays. In the United States, they're very underfunded, and so this was the trailer for Gideon's Army.
You swear or affirm the testimony about to give you the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
When you work
Turn it
as
up
a
a little
public
bit.
defender,
Is there?
you say to somebody, I'm a public defender, and then they're like, well, what does that mean? I defend people who are charged with committing crimes. And then they'll say, how can you defend those people? I tell them the truth. It's about the sanctity of human liberty and the cost of it if you want to take it.
Mr. Cassidy has been found guilty of possession of crack cocaine. The court sentences you to 16 years.
You guys are doing the most difficult work in the most difficult cases. I know one issue is certainly money, but another issue is that it's just too hard. I feel defeated.
This is all I have in the world right now.
We'll start with the non-indicted. It's a boatload of things.
I've been schooled around the first time by a public defender. And when they told me I had nothing, I paid my life completely over.
I wish I could say that we were going to go in and win this case. I just don't know. And that's the God's honest truth.
If you're trying to rescue people from hell, you do have to go to hell to do it, right? And if you don't, you won't rescue anyone.
I know. Get
have the gall to say that this is not a big case. There are huge consequences. You want to take my liberty, you gotta do it right. And if you don't, acquit. All right.
I don't see how you can do this work for any period of time and not begin to love it. Either this is your cause or this ain't.
So following Gideon's Army, we did a fairly massive campaign taking the film around to schools. Law schools started using it. The ACLU partnered with us, other legal services organizations. Public defenders in the United States are unseen. The vast majority of people who are arrested are poor. And so if a middle-class person or a person with any means is arrested, they'll usually pay for a private lawyer. Can anyone guess what percentage of cases actually go to trial in the United States? Do you all have law and order here? You probably do, right? It's everywhere. It's like a weed. So who's seen Law and Order here? You know you've all seen it. So who's seen Law and Order, right? So guess what percentage of cases go to trial in the United States? Anybody? Just yell it. 6%? Very, very happy person. Yes. Anybody else? 1%. Wow, this is a grim group. Anybody else? 20%. So it's about 3% of cases. So all of the cases that you're seeing on Law and Order, that's all the cases that go to trial in the entire country, because no one goes to trial. The incentives against going to trial and the overwhelming number of people who are arrested are poor. So when you can put those two facts together, you see that poor people are getting arrested and are not getting their day in court. They are not being tried. So much for our American system of justice. The people who actually are going to trial a lot, ironically, are public defenders. Because they are trial lawyers, they're not afraid to go to court. And often, as you saw, the judge who sentenced the man to crack cocaine, what he actually did after that is he doubled that sentence to 32 years for possession of crack, because it was the person's third offense. In Louisiana, a third possession can still get you life without the possibility of parole, a third conviction. And that is even if you are the person, let's say you're in a car with a controlled substance, even though that controlled substance is legal in some of our states, if in some states it is not, possession is a strike, second possession is a strike, third possession is life, no parole. So those are the things that people are being arrested for in the United States. Doing that film, I learned, it was my first film, so we were distributed by HBO, which was fantastic. Then it went to Netflix, which is also great because it gives your film another life. And as Lindsey said, it goes everywhere. Netflix is in 113 million homes across the world. And so they don't give you numbers, but I'm like, who cares? They took it and they're playing it. So I don't care about the numbers. There's a big debate about that. And I'm happy to answer questions about that if you have them. But my feeling is being on the platform gives me an access for films that is unparalleled. So the next film, I made a civil rights film in between that. I did a couple of shorts. And then I was filming on another project, and I was in Mississippi, and I like to read the local papers when I'm there. I read in the local papers that there is one abortion clinic in the entire state of Mississippi, the entire state. It turns out there are 6 states in the United States with one abortion clinic. In the state of Texas, the abortion clinics, Texas is larger than almost, I think it's our largest. I don't know if it's our largest state, but I think it is our largest state, maybe, except for Alaska, maybe. I don't know, I'm asking her and she's British. So don't comment on the American educational system, maybe Will knows. Texas is an incredibly large state. It can take you 9 hours to drive from one end of Texas to the other. While I was filming there, I read about this clinic, and because we're filmmakers, we do what normal people would do, which I called them up and said, can I come over? And I happened to have a camera crew with me, and they said that I could. And I met this, you're laughing because that's what happens. That's what we do. People say, how do you get your ideas? I'm like, well, if you call people, sometimes they will talk to you. So I went over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, how many hundreds of women were coming through this clinic. The doctors were being made to go through incredible hoops. And so the result was my film, Trapped. And I'll show you a clip from Trapped.
In Texas today, Governor Rick Perry found women have to be consumed in the fight to eliminate abortion.
Women are going to have abortions. It's just that they are not going to be safe and legal.
The legislature passed a bill that they knew that we could not comply with. And that was the function of the bill. The function is a trap.
In the past 3 years, there have been hundreds of restrictions passed, more than in the past decade.
These rules don't add anything to the safety of women.
This is our pharmacy. The drugs always expire because we never use them. I don't know that we've ever used any of these things in this clinic ever.
They chop away piecemeal that reproductive rights.
There's a 2 to 3 week waiting list for a procedure where time is of the essence.
I remember getting a call once from a patient. She said, "Why if I tell you what I have in my kitchen cabinet and you tell me what I can do?"
We've forgotten what this country is about. Dignity's given to God.
I have a hard time forgiving myself.
I want women to talk to each other, to quit shaming each other. I want people to quit shaming women over abortion, period.
I'm on the floor today to give voice to thousands of Texans who have been ignored.
The Supreme Court is going to hear another one of these cases, and it's going to be a showdown.
They're letting politics trump medicine.
You should understand it's not going to happen without a fight.
It is escalating what is happening across the United States.
It's increasingly becoming the case that women's constitutional rights are determined by their zip codes.
I just want more people to start asking who's benefiting. Who benefits?
So with Trapped, sometimes you get obsessed with an issue and it just takes you over. And that's what happened with me, my producing partner, Marilyn Ness. So once I was in the clinic, usually you try and have a little bit of a run-up. Like Lindsey was discussing how expensive it is to make movies. The biggest expense really is people. You have to pay people. So during your production, you have to pay people. And then on top of that, if you want the movie to get out, the most critical thing that we do is budget for after the film's release. It's not actually raising the film's budget because there's not a whole heck of a lot of point in making an amazing movie if no one will see it or if not enough people will see it. So the challenge we faced with Trapped was we were filming. So the woman who said it's going to be a showdown heads a group called the Center for Reproductive Rights. It's a not-for-profit law firm. 98% of the lawyers are women. And they are like just fierce kind of warriors. So initially, my idea as a lawyer, I keep getting kind of drawn to these legal topics. And my idea was I was going to follow the lawyers. And the lawyers were a little, as lawyers tend to be, a little recalcitrant. And so we kind of had to figure out a way to tell the story. The abortion providers, interestingly, whose lives are threatened constantly, more than welcomed our cameras. They said, we need to show people what is happening here. And, you know, I'll tell you one thing about, you know, the art of storytelling is, I think as documentary people, your goal is to tell the truth, but it's the truth as you see it. And one of the things that I saw, which was so disconcerting, is, I don't know how many of you have traveled in the American South. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful. It's really lush and green. It's rolling hills. People are friendly, at least to your face. And so you'd be outside, and it'd be this blue sky and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and you know, but there was all this ugliness. There were these protesters who would scream at people, "You're going to hell! Don't kill your baby! Please don't kill me!" Just horrific things, screaming at people. And then you go inside, and the clinic, just a medical clinic, was warm and safe and inviting. I had never been in an abortion clinic. I hadn't had an abortion. I hadn't gone with a friend. And so I'm a little bit ashamed to say, I thought my opinions were shaped by the media I'd heard, which makes you feel as if it's a sad place and a dire place. It couldn't have been anything further from the truth. And so I realized that the story wasn't the lawyers, as much as I love, sword-waving she-women. It was the patients and the doctors and what they have to do in order to create that atmosphere of safety. So we completed the film. This film, really, all films are difficult. This one almost made us knuckle under because we did not have a broadcaster at the time we started shooting, which meant we had to raise almost all of the budget in real time as we were filming. And if you can imagine, it was this crazy race against time. The legislatures were passing laws. We wanted to be filming. We had to get the money quickly. And so using contacts from my first film and Marilyn's contacts, so she was constantly raising money and we were scraping it together and then flying south. So it was this kind of year when we were just constantly in production and raising money at the same time. And I have 2 children and a dog. So it was not that fun, but it was worth it. So this is usually what happens is you make a movie, you have all your stress, but then you release the movie and then you do what a sane producer does, like Lindsey, and you birth it out into the world and you've already got your ducks in a row and da-da-da-da. We didn't have that luxury with Trapped. One important thing that we felt very strongly about is we could have had a Planned Parenthood or somebody fund the whole thing. I did not want to do that. My background is in journalism. I did not want the film to be used even more as an advocacy piece. I wanted it to be a film. I wanted all of the facts to be unassailable. I hired a separate journalist to kick the tires and double fact check every fact that we did because I knew that it would be attacked. The stronger your facts are, the stronger your film is as attacked. Can we get this on this screen? Is that possible?
Is it next to you on this?
Oh, it's on this one, okay. But I can actually see it here. So traditionally is the first line. You kind of read this across. Traditionally, you would have your festival premiere. We put it in January because that's when Sundance is and everybody likes to dream. So traditionally, that's what you would have. Then you would come out of Sundance victorious and somebody would pay you $1 gazillion and your movie would be released and you would sit and sip champagne. That's not what happens. But you would have time for a theatrical release, festivals, press, and then your grassroots screening. With Trapped, what we did is we released the film in January 26th at Sundance. The next month, we did our theatrical, more festivals, more grassroots screenings, and additional press. We did it all as a huge drop all at one time. To get to that point, we had done a Kickstarter campaign, and we had really done the Kickstarter not so much for money, although we did end up raising, I think, about $60,000. We did the Kickstarter for exposure and to bring on, power, people who are powerful on Twitter, celebrities. So if any of you have done a Kickstarter, the key to a Kickstarter is to have a few large donors ready to go. So you have your first large donor, you come out of the gate with your campaign, you have all of your reminders all lined up already. So they're just ready to press go when you want them over the course of the month of your campaign. You have a big donor who comes right out of the gate, so that's supposed to get people excited. It does. Then you keep reminding your followers, you thank people. In the middle of your campaign, where it gets kind of sluggish, you get another big giant donor. And that kind of re-energizes you. And then usually what you do is you have a third big donor. And when I say big, it's between $5,000 and $10,000. Those are big donors for Kickstarter, depending on your goal. Our goal, I think, was $50,000. Our stretch goal was $60,000, and we definitely raised that. So that you know that you can make your goal. Because the thing with Kickstarter is if you don't make your goal, you don't get any of the money. So we did that. That really helped our national profile. It also alerted us through Planned Parenthood retweeting. We worked with all of the advocacy groups who by then had seen the movie. They had not participated in the movie, but they had seen it by then. And so using their Twitter list and Instagram list, that is the way we amplified our message in addition to the press. The other thing, the reason why we did this crazy plan is because we knew that there was a big Supreme Court case happening in June. So 6 months after our first release, we wanted to be in the national media before that Supreme Court argument happened. And so that's why there was such a rush to do all of this. So here's how much it costs to have that kind of campaign. Digital is really, really huge because it goes everywhere. It's actually the most bang for your buck. $47,000 in overhead. I see too many filmmakers who do not account for the fact that they need an office. If you're going to have those talented people that Lindsey was talking about, you have to put them someplace. And as much as remote working is convenient for all of us, it is actually, if you can do it, it is far preferable for you all to be in the same room. When I had so many people working at the same time, we had to have like a core office space for people to all gather together and make sure we were all on the same page, not reaching out to the same donors, not reaching out to the same press outlets. We had 2 publicists who were also working. Those are really, really key. $84,000 for our grassroots campaign. What that consisted of is we hired a person who specializes in taking films around to college campuses, to community screenings, and we ended up doing a ton of those, which I'll show you in the next slide. Theatrical distribution. Guess what? It costs money to distribute your film in the theaters. It costs $80,000 to distribute your film. You have to pay your distributors before it gets on that theater. So it's not like you give them the movie and then you cross your fingers and hope. You have to actually pay all those print expenses. That's movie math for all of you. Campaign staff, clearly the biggest cost. And then publicity. As I said, we had 2 publicists. They had whole teams. So that's where all that money goes. And despite the fact that, it's a lot, it's almost $500,000, that our budget was about not quite $1 million. So our publicity campaign was almost half of our budget. So that gives you a sense of things. The results paid off. In just that 6 months, we did 295 community screenings. Every state, we're exceedingly proud of that. 202 unique cities. In June alone, we did 70 screenings in 30 states. I was traveling around to as many of those as possible. That is another reason I've met Jen Brea. She is just an incredible artist and person and a brilliant woman. But to do that and to not be feeling well is just, I just can't say enough about what a beautiful movie she made and what an impact it made. It was like everywhere you would go, it was like unrest was there. We particularly targeted places where trap laws. Those are targeted regulations of abortion providers. So those laws would provide things like in a little medical clinic, you would have to have hospital certified regulations. You would have to have hallways wide enough for gurneys. You would have to have in the wall anesthesia systems. You would have to have drugs in case of heart attack, stroke, or all these things that never happened. And the saddest thing, well, there are so many sad things, but one of the saddest things to me is I'm sure you know that there is a healthcare crisis. There are healthcare deserts in America. And there are these beautiful clinics that the abortion providers were forced to use, which are not usable for any other purpose. The clinic that you saw in the clip, you could treat a heart attack victim there successfully. That machinery is never, ever used. They would buy medicines that have to be thrown out every 30 days because they expire, like at a cost of several $1,000s. So while people are going sick and have no health care, these facilities that the Texas legislature mandated and required and the reason why is the Texas legislature also mandated that if you provide any health care in an abortion facility, you are not eligible for any federal funding. So if you are a person who wants to treat people with strep or a cold, and they went into that gorgeous, pristine clinic, they would be ineligible for further funding. That is not possible in most of these states, where most of them are poor states. So as a result, you have these gleaming castles that sit unused. So we have theatrical distribution across 16 festivals, including Sundance and South by. Then we had our big thing, which is our PBS broadcast. I can't stress enough Lindsey's point that you have to have all of your partners working together. And this, I think, is one opportunity. If any of you business people are interested in film, we are constantly recreating this wheel. And the reason for that is that we can't stay in activist outreach mode all the time. We move on to the next film. So as much as I care about reproductive rights, I can't raise $500,000 a year, and this would be all that I would do. We need to find a way, and this is the challenge and opportunity I issue to you. We need to find a way to have more filmmakers be able to replicate this process. I'm a very energetic person. Jen is a very energetic person, as is Lindsey. These films and their success should not depend on my energy level. There should be an easier and more replicable model for these distributions to get out. But I'm very proud of what we did. So we had 120,000 visits to trap.com, Twitter, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. This is some social media that we did. Nayral did something with us. Lena Dunham did something. And there's our Trapped. We got some celebrities. You know, if you go and look on like a Planned Parenthood donor list, you will see who their supporters are. And so we reached out to those people, and a number of them tweeted on specific days. And that was incredibly effective. The magnitude of that really helped. This was just a little funny thing. So because America's America, in the cities and states where trap laws were most pervasive and most harmful, some of the public television stations were not going to broadcast the movie. So I have a great social media person. He designed this whole thing. And so he did this like little quiz. Like, what are PBS stations airing instead of Trapped in Mississippi and Alabama? And so the answer is actually a program about sandwich making. So there was a Supreme Court case going on in those states, and they were airing a program about sandwiches. PBS was very unhappy with us, actually, but you know what? Too bad, so sad. So, so there are fun things that you can do. So yeah, this is the quiz, and literally the answer is sandwiches you'll like. Then we did this. So we also wanted to give it a little love. The Texas PBS station did air it at great personal, the general manager of that station was really under fire for airing a program about abortion rights in the state that was about to have a Supreme Court case decided. They were getting a lot of pressure not to do it, but they did, and we gave them a little bit of love there. I'm really, really thrilled that you're here. You know, since Trapped, I've gone on and I'm making a film. I made a series on Netflix about Bobby Kennedy for president, and that was 4 episodes. I'm now doing a film with President Obama's White House photographer, Pete Sousa, which I'm very, very excited about because you know, we are in a situation where democracy is under threat. And one of the ways that images are powerful, and Pete Sousa's images are not just of President Obama, they are of an administration, and they chronicle every important issue that has happened in America in the last 8 years. I'm leaving the last 2 years out because they're too depressing. So thank you very much for coming. So thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting us.
So Kathy had touched on before that I have some connections in the space. I'm not a filmmaker like these two amazing ladies, but I ran an impact campaign in my former life for a documentary that's now on HBO called I Am Evidence. And it's about the backlog of untested rape kits, and through that film and the campaign that we built around it, we were able to get 34 laws passed in, I think it was 26 states. So there's no question, and you know, both of them have touched on this, the power of impact campaigns and the rollout strategy and the distribution to actually make change. But one of the things that I'm really interested to hear from the two of you is, what about what happens before? So you're making a story, or you have a story, excuse me, you're making a film, and you obviously want that to be, beautifully told and depicted, but there's another step that as filmmakers, or documentary filmmakers, you have to think about, which is actually inspiring people to drive change. So for me as an impact producer, there's only so much you can do. If you don't have a great film to work with as your tool, you're not going to get 34 laws passed. So we were lucky to have that. But as filmmakers, how do you think about, when you're actually in the process of making the film, how to ensure that the audience leaves not just feeling dejected and like, oh my God, this is so depressing, I didn't even know, these statistics and all of this before, but actually inspired and empowered to do something about it and give them the tools that they need to do that.
Mm-hmm. It is important, and it almost feels awkward saying this, but you do want your audience to be entertained. Mm-hmm. And so that is part of the skill of the producing and directing team, is to figure out things do need to be watchable. We are human beings and we respond viscerally to what we see. So for me, it's finding the right characters. And then, I am constantly thinking about what would I want to see if I was an audience member. What would I want to know? And people really do enjoy being kind of dropped into a world that they haven't experienced before. I think there's also, if you can find something that is relatable to people, you will have them and they will stay with you. But you should never take your audience for granted. So in Gideon's Army, we had the story of a young man who was 17. He was 16 when he was arrested. The state of Georgia tried him as an adult. He was accused of stealing $250 from a pizza store. He was accused of using a gun. He was the minimum penalty for stealing $250 with a gun is 10 years. The maximum penalty is life. So this young man, never been arrested, no eyewitnesses, no fingerprints, no evidence except for the person who was robbed, was facing 10 to life. And so, but we've all seen the parade of young black men accused of crimes. And, I don't know about you all, but when you see this parade, it's very depersonalizing. You really don't. So I interviewed him in his home in regular clothes. Mercifully, he was able to get out on bail, which is not usually the situation. And I interviewed his mother. And I asked her to show me her photo book, So she goes through and she's showing photos and she says what all mothers say, DeMontis was a very good baby. And as soon as you say that, you start to think of him as a baby. And you start to think of your own baby, and I think of my baby. And you think of, you just start to think of her as a mother. And she's doing this. She's not prompted. This is just what mothers do. And once people see him as a person, the person who they might have crossed the street because they were afraid of a young black kid with his pants hanging down, they're on their edge of their seats cheering for him. And that's what you want. You want to connect to people. And for me, it's finding characters that help you connect. I also think you can't blame people for what they believe. If none of us have been arrested, we get our information from Law and Order, which says everybody's getting a trial and everybody's guilty. So understand that and embrace it, and don't lecture to people, but kind of go in the same way. I didn't know a lot about the criminal justice system, and and that's what I mean about being respectful.
Yeah, and in terms of not lecturing people, it is all about that human connection that you need. I'm not going to go and sit in the cinema for 90 minutes and watch something that is trying to teach me a lesson.
Right.
I am going to go and sit and watch something that's going to make me feel something. And it's going to show me people and situations that I couldn't experience otherwise. And it's going to give me the space as a viewer to actually insert myself into that story. Leave space, leave moments when nothing is happening and nothing is being said, so that you can reflect on what's going on and realize how connected it is to you as a human. And I think the other thing we have to do is not tidy up our stories at the end and not go, well, that's the end of the film, you can go home and feel better. You can't. You need to go home and you need to think about how this is going to affect you, how this might affect you in the future, how this might affect people you know. I don't think that you can kind of clear everything up at the end of a film, because you sort of can't let people off the hook.
Mm-hmm. And did you think about, I mean, did you give kind of specific tools either on your website or at screenings on a card? Was there kind of that element where you were like, okay, these are the exact things that we want people to leave and do?
We didn't do that with Trapped, and I'll tell you why.
One, because so fast.
We did it so fast, but we
incredible.
also there was legislation pending, and we didn't want to advocate for any particular legislation. So what we did do is the abortion providers are great at Q&As. I mean, once they were let out of the gate, they couldn't stop talking, and they were our most effective allies. So at every screening, we had either a provider or a doctor, because once we had the screenings, then people were curious about what was happening in their community. Mm-hmm. So I live in California, I teach at Berkeley. There's no abortion clinic in Berkeley, which you would think is the most liberal of the liberal places. There's not a clinic there. And so the clinics in San Francisco are seeing people from other places in California. They're seeing people. So we would bring people and say, you can support your local clinic. You can call your representative. The best thing that happened to us, though, sorry to take so much time, is I had been on John Oliver's show with Gideon's Army. I had been on, it was Jon Stewart. I had been on Jon Stewart, and John Oliver was sitting in for him. And then when I did Trapped, his producer called and said, we heard about this, we're interested in it, can we do a segment on it? And I was like, can you? Can you really? So if you ever want to have your facts checked, give them to John Oliver's producer, because they checked, this was before a broadcast, they checked every single thing. Like they literally called and they were like, you said there was like section 13A was not, and there's no section 13A. And I was like, well, that was in the earlier version of the statute. It was like just like really like intense, but I felt really good about the facts because right. So we get to the Supreme Court. The film had come out in January. The Supreme Court argument was in March. And I get to the Supreme Court, and there were all these young women carrying signs from the movie because they had seen it on John Oliver. John Oliver's broadcast got us 2 million views, an hour devoted to the show. So, like, you can't buy that kind of publicity. It was, you know, it was like trap laws and like, you know, like quotes from our characters. We brought all our characters to the Supreme Court. So we did things like that.
Amazing. So I want to give it over to the audience, but one more question before we do that. You know, you both talked about, or all 4 of these films that you have spoken about are based in the United States. But they have been shown internationally and they have affected change internationally. So when you're making the film, when you're, you know, creating the distribution plan, how important is it to you that these films are relevant in a global context, and how do you go about that and making sure that it kind of transcends borders?
I mean, I think every film is different, as we've said already, but I mean, in the case of Unrest, there were specific problems in the US community, in the UK community, in Denmark and in Australia, and those are kind of the markets that we really, really wanted to hit in terms of audience as well as kind of impact and sort of strategic targets. And so we were incredibly detailed about dividing that up and focusing on it. And actually Denmark ended up being incredibly difficult and like slightly beyond our capacity in a really detailed way. It was just like,
Denmark.
Yeah. And then Australia, this whole kind of organisation took up the work and gave us extraordinary support as a result of seeing the film at Sundance, and kind of did that with quite a lot of independence, although Jen was across everything in this incredibly detailed, nuanced way, which is amazing. But that was a huge part of our strategy, because we knew we wanted to do and affect specific things, and because there were so many problems here around the treatment of that illness. But with the ACLU series, we're about to have our festival premiere at South by Southwest next week. This week, and we've got a bunch of other festivals potentially coming up, but we can't go to any international ones because the ACLU will not invest any of its time and its resources, time for us, in terms of the lawyers who have to kind of oversee every place that these films go. They will not invest any time at all in kind of international.
So could you go separately from the ACLU or no?
Okay. No, the cuts are owned by the ACLU, and everything it's extremely tightly managed with an amazing team in-house at the ACLU who look after film creation. And then the kind of the rights that go alongside that. But we can't technically do anything of our own, which is really new to me. Those restrictions are really new to me. But what's been beautiful...
They're new to it, so I think that they'll learn.
I hope so.
In good time.
What's been lovely is seeing the kind of what's happened spontaneously. You know, someone had posted the film series on a UK blog about trans rights in the UK, because we've been having kind of a process of looking at the Gender Recognition Act in the UK over recent months. People were using the films and saying, this is how to understand more about trans people. And that was something that happened spontaneously and is a wonderful thing. And that's the kind of argument that we, you know, kind of put towards the ACLU, who are, bless them, very busy.
Yeah. I mean, for the criminal justice film, Gideon's Army, we had a great UK screening, and similarly, individual markets reached out to us. We had a hard time finding an international distributor because they thought it was too US specific. But we started getting so many inquiries from all around the world that I had this wonderful associate producer, and we couldn't find an international distributor. And so we started getting so many that she said, you know what, let's just make some DVDs by ourselves. And so we did. And then she would come every month and she would have me sign something, and I was really busy. I wasn't really paying attention. At the end of the month, I looked up, and within 6 months, she'd sold $30,000 worth of DVDs at $400 pop. So there clearly was a market for it. With Trapped, we knew that there was an international problem, largely because we were smarter and more strategic, as Lindsey is saying, like knowing your partner, so we picked a distribution partner that would allow us to do international work. And that paid off in spades. The Irish showed, Trapped was shown at several film festivals and in community screenings. We provided it to them for free. And so now, it's not because of Trapped, but I know that Ireland now has more progressive laws countrywide than the United States. So going from abortion being illegal to now being more protected than the United States, I definitely feel like we were part of that. And the international screenings were just as important. Also, you know, thinking about your broadcaster or your distributor, Netflix absolutely wants you to have an international appeal. They won't just take, if there's no such thing as a Netflix film, they're all different because they want to serve the entire world. The one common denominator is you must have some international appeal that is demonstrable.
Which is so interesting, because when we were pitching Unrest and fundraising for years and years as we were making the film, every single traditional broadcaster said, oh, just stick to one country, this is too much, it's too complicated. And Jen was absolutely resolute that it absolutely was not too much and it was not too complicated, and that international perspective was essential. And she was right, you know, but we really had to fight for that. And then it became, actually, you know, originally we hoped to sell, you know, to the BBC, to PBS, to ABC, to all these different little pockets of television. And frankly, those different pockets of television have made it extremely hard to sell to them. It's incredibly time expensive. It's really complicated. The legal process is a nightmare for independent filmmakers because it just takes so long. And so actually selling to Netflix, and selling to Netflix was wonderful for us for that international perspective,
Definitely. Well, we'd love to get some questions from all of you. Yep, here we have one already.
Thank you so much.
Have a mic.
Thank you so much for this fascinating presentation. Such a privilege to listen to you tonight. My question is one around the financing of your films. You demonstrated to us, you know, how complicated the financing is, you know, what hard work it really is. You saw a lot of foundations and trusts investing in these important films. My question is, do you see an opportunity for these kinds of films to actually be an impact investing vehicle? Because, you know, it is so evident that there's a financial but also a societal return that's really measurable, and in some cases even, you know, a service to democracy or the health and fitness of our legal system. So have you, in your conversations, explored that with impact investors, and what's your perspective on it?
Definitely. And so at the in the last 2 years, this last movie cycle culminating with this Oscars, we had independent documentaries had an extraordinary theatrical life. The film about Mr. Rogers, which actually is a film about empathy and kindness. Guess who needs that? Guess which country needs empathy and kindness? All of them. Did $22 million at the box office. That's extraordinary for documentary. The film about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Rule of Justice, Rule of Law, $16 million at the box office. Yeah. Then there's one, Three Identical Strangers, It's Just Cool, $14 million at the box office. So we are seeing there is now the potential, now that investors are seeing the potential to actually not only return money, but make money. We're seeing a little more interest from people who might be good, might just be interested in good cinema and a good return. The other thing we definitely do see, though, are individuals, and even in some ways more exciting, a number of the banks and big law firms and and private, regular businesses. What they will do is facilitate a fund for their employees to invest in a film, and they'll usually make it as a grant. But they're part of our investment strategy. For Trapped, because we had so little time to do the movie, it was like over a year and a half. I had one individual private investor for $250, one for $100, and one for $200. So all women. So 3 individual investors. 2 were grants and one was an investor. And we've been able to pay her back, not all quite yet, but she's pretty happy with the result. So it depends on what your objectives are. So I always try and be really transparent with people. If you're looking to make a killing in money, I can't guarantee that. I can guarantee now that having gone through 2 big impact campaigns, I do know, I won't tell you I can do a big impact if I can't do that. So, there's a real opportunity.
I think geographically, I'm really confused right now because we're in the UK. You're both American. I work on American films. These are all American films, but we are in the UK. Haven't slept a lot recently. I think it's really worth noting that there is a much richer environment for this kind of fundraising and these kind of investment relationships in the US than there is here. It's extremely limited here, and I think it's partly to do with how we talk about money, how we talk about business, how we talk openly in networks about cash. I think that there's a slightly different culture here. And one of the reasons I work so much in the US is because of the tremendous energy embodied right here, that's happening around storytelling and being bold and being creative and finding new ways to make these models and taking risks. It's exciting and it's yielding incredible results. But I think the UK is much slower to embrace that, and we have a much, much smaller network of people prepared to have those conversations right now.
And yet we're such a strong financial sector, so I'm really wondering if there's an opportunity for bonds or impact bonds for film as well.
I think we need to build some links, build some communication.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nina Appelli. I'm an alumni from SBS. So first of all, just a huge thank you to both of you for sharing your stories. Personally, I found it so inspiring, so interesting, and I think you're both extremely courageous to follow your interests and passions to the extent that you have, because one can see how complicated and how complex it must be. So thank you. On to my question. So again, it's related to finance. And obviously, I think that the funding of your projects is such a critical aspect of how successful you can be, particularly when you think of the various avenues you have for raising funds. Do you ever worry that the routes through which you raise funds influence the story and the way it's told? And how do you get around that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really critical, that is why we didn't take money from Planned Parenthood, NARAL, which is National Abortion Rights Action League, or any advocacy interest group. It had to be private individuals or foundations, because it's absolutely essential that your film be journalistically sound. So I knew, I had done ethics and standards at a major news network for 8 years, so I knew what was coming at me. So I wrote to every single legislator that had trap laws in writing, kept a copy, followed up with phone calls, asking for on-camera interviews, because I knew none of them would do it. And even if they had, I would have been thrilled to have them. But you have to be, in my opinion, it's really, really critical for documentarians who are taking on social issues to be journalistically sound. And you'll see, I don't know if you've heard about the Finding Neverland about Michael Jackson. So the criticism of that film is that they didn't interview anybody who didn't have the same abusive experience. They didn't declare that both people had been supporters of his. So we're left with a film that may or may not be true, but there's so many darts thrown at it that it is not an effective advocacy tool. So your worst nightmare is that there are children who have been abused, who have gone through the process of making a film, and now that film is not useful for its advocacy. So you have to be. Right now, I'm mostly, the last couple of projects I've done have been almost fully financed at the beginning and by independent networks. But there's a really interesting model I'm doing now where the network is doing a little over a half of the budget, but half of their investment is a license and the other half is equity. So if we, I'll just make up numbers here. Let's say the movie cost $1 million. If we do a big box office number, they'll be in that line of equity investors. And we love that because it left the producers enough equity so that there's an upside for us as well.
Yeah.
So the networks are not just writing big checks. The exception is Netflix. Netflix just writes you a big check. They own it. They own every single thing about it. You have to really work with them to be able to do impact screenings. That to me is the one downside to Netflix is because they want it on the service. They don't want it in 250 community screenings. They want you to watch it at home with your Chinese food. So. But I think the other networks, possibly because they don't have as much money as Netflix, are willing to be more creative. So if you are experienced producers like we are, you can go to other investors who know that you have a track record and say, this is an opportunity for you. So that's what we're doing now. But your question is absolutely right. I cannot tell you, if advocacy people fund films, it's like going with a weight around your neck out to distribute.
Then when it comes to the ACLU series, that was commissioned by them, funded by them. And what we did was, they had editorial sign-off. We always knew what they wanted to do and to say. But we made sure that we worked with trans advisors so that we work with people who have lived experience of being, trans women, trans men, trans advocates. So all of our cuts were checked to make sure that what was embedded was their perspective. That's where we were coming from, and the ACLU was really supportive of that. And so
I do think the
They're different,
ACLU
right?
is a little different.
They're different, yeah.
So
Yeah.
I meant more like for an abortion rights advocacy group for an abortion film. The ACLU has so many different issues, and their thing is proper application of law and democracy. So I think ACLU is, while you'll be tagged with a liberal bent, you're going to be tagged with a liberal bent anyway.
Exactly.
So
That's
I'm
what I was
not,
gonna say.
and they don't have any money. Usually, if here they got a grant, but still they're not. They don't quite have the same trouble. As other,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important distinction because you are going to have the liberal tag anyway.
You might as well embrace it if you have a big network.
Yeah, but I think particularly because I'm usually working with either donations or equity, and honestly trying to work with donations as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because equity is complicated and a heavy burden in lots of ways. There is no editorial involvement from those funders whatsoever. And again,
they don't see the movie before it's done.
They don't get to give feedback. They just get to come to the premiere and celebrate their contribution.
I don't even let my subjects see the movie before it's done. So they see it with everybody else in the theaters. It's quite nerve-wracking. Sometimes I'll show it to them right before the theatrical so that if there's sensitive, I can give them a chance to react. And sometimes they don't like it. And that's part of being a filmmaker. You just have to wear your big girl pants and wait for them to come around.
So I think we're out of time, but we can maybe do one more question. I'll do this side. Yes, go for it.
Yeah, 2 questions. So you guys both gave us examples that were successful. I'm wondering if you have had projects that you really believed in or cared for that maybe weren't successful, and what you learned from that. And then I guess maybe just another quick one is, like, you guys both have transitioned from not being a filmmaker to being a filmmaker. I was wondering if you could talk about that process of becoming what you wanted to be.
No, I'm good. I think because I did these 2 films and then my current ones are fully funded, it's not the same challenge. They're all, you meet one goal and you set the next one for yourself. So I'm sure some of you recognize that personality type in this room. So I'll speak to and I'm not saying everything's, literally I lost sleep, I lost hair, Trapped was really, really, really hard. The failure, I think, is that the model is so burdensome that I would not do that again for a while. And I think that that's a failure, because now I know how to do it.
Yeah.
And because I know how to do it, I'm not going to do it for a while. I need a break from that. It just was too exhausting. So I was a lawyer at a private firm, then a lawyer for ABC News. Then I went to the news division. I did ethics and standards, and then I did ethics and standards for A&E, which is U.S. cable channel. And then I just didn't want to keep the world safe for reality TV. So I thought I kind of used all my networks and connections, and I spent a year going to film conferences. So I went to Sheffield, I went all over, I went to Australia, I went all over the place, and getting a sense of the market, and getting a sense of what people were buying, and how much they cost, and understanding the financial model before I ever had an idea for a movie. And that to me felt like doing my homework. I made all these contacts along the way because I had nothing to ask them for. I wasn't handing them a movie to see, who am I? I hadn't done anything. There's no reason for them to believe me. So then I've realized that the way in America, and to some extent internationally, that you build a reputation for a film has a very long gestational period. So you apply to different foundations, and that is a way of getting exposure to the community. So if you get a Sundance grant or a Tribeca grant, if you do Good Pitch, which is actually originated in the UK, all of that gets people familiarity with your movie. So by the time you get your theatrical, you get your festival, a lot of very important people are familiar with the film, and it's not that they're waiting for it, but they're familiar with it, and they're familiar with you as a filmmaker. It also gives you a chance to hone your speaking skills, your pitch, and it's a small community. I mean, even internationally, it's a small community, and so having those relationships over time, and also successfully delivering. And by delivering, it doesn't mean a big number. It means being a good partner. So if you're a prima donna who's like, it's my way or the highway, you'll get your one movie, but there's a gazillion good movies out there, and no one needs to work with an asshole. So they won't. So, kind of like not being that is also helpful.
That's my main advice to my film students: just don't be an asshole. It's really that.
It's true.
You mentioned how did we kind of both get into this? I started out in television. I was a whale-watching researcher before that, but I always wanted to... not good at science, unfortunately. I just really like boats. So I kind of began in television. And people like me, I think, have this fantasy that when you're a lawyer first, you do these grown-up things like save money and buy property. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it's certainly how I've always fantasized about that previous life. And that isn't a thing that I did. I started out in television, left television, hadn't saved any money from when they pay you a proper salary, and then went into independent film where they definitely don't pay you a proper salary. And that's had a really big impact on the projects I can do, And so something that I've been working on setting up is a kind of I Believe in You fund, essentially, for filmmakers who don't have any kind of economic security. You know, and that's as simple as who don't own property or who don't have a husband or a wife who has a salary that might be able to pay the bills for a few months while they develop an idea. And I think that those things really have to be factored into how we think about who gets to tell stories. Because I know that from my perspective, that's certainly impacted me, and it all comes down to finance in the end, and how we get to take these big creative risks.
Yeah, it's really hard to be creative if you're worried about paying your bills. So it's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
Well, I hate to end it. I know there were some more questions over here, so we do have a reception.
I'm working on a film about Pete Sousa, a Obama's photographer, and also a film about civil rights legend John Lewis.
Do you want to go?
I can. I'm making a film with a gender theorist that's kind of a playful, provocative, what happens if we try and conform and we try and assimilate and we try and adopt a sort of commercial approach to gender and sexuality. So I'm directing that and working with the ACLU on another project and developing a fictional film about a forgotten female scientist.
Very cool. Well, I do encourage you to go and watch the films if you haven't. Trapped and Unrest are on Netflix, and Gideon's Army, iTunes, you can get it, and Trans in America.
Them's on the internet.
Condé Nast, you can Google it, it's free, you can watch it online. So definitely go and do that. Dawn brought the Trapped impact report, so we have some copies of that here for anyone who's interested in the stats and in the distribution plan that they had there. And we do have the reception, so if you have more questions, I'm sure Dawn and Lindsey would be happy to answer them there. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to Dawn and Lindsey for coming all the way.